I was 63 years old when I nearly lost everything I had spent my entire life building, and the person who saved me was a woman I had never met before, sitting alone at a table by the window of a Tim Hortons on a Tuesday afternoon. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My husband and I had been married for 22 years. 22 years is a long time. Long enough that you stop questioning certain things. Long enough that you stop questioning supiniolarity with trust. His name was Clifford. Cliff, everyone called him. He was the kind of man who always had a firm handshake and a reasonable explanation for everything. People liked him. Our neighbors liked him. Our accountant liked him. Even my sister liked him, and my sister doesn't like anyone. We lived in a semi-detached in Oakville, Ontario. Nothing fancy, but it was ours, or so I thought. I had worked as a dental hygienist for 31 years. Steady income, good benefits, the kind of job people don't think about until they need you. I had put a significant amount into our joint savings over the decades. I had also inherited a small amount from my mother when she passed in 2019. Not a fortune, but meaningful. About $68,000 that I had kept in a separate account, a personal one in my name only. My mother had been clear about that before she died. "That's yours, Patricia," she'd said. Except she didn't call me Patricia. She called me Patsy. I hadn't thought about that money much. It was just sitting there in a GIC at TD, quietly existing, a kind of safety net I never thought I'd need. I don't know exactly when things started to shift with Cliff. That's the thing no one tells you about being deceived by someone close to you. You don't notice it happening. You explain things away. You give benefit of the doubt. You assume the best because the alternative is too uncomfortable to sit with. He had started a small property management company about 4 years before all of this happened. He managed a handful of rental units across the Hamilton area. Nothing major, he'd said, just a side project. Something to keep him busy after he took early retirement from the insurance firm. I had signed some documents early on. He'd explained them to me quickly, standing at the kitchen counter, papers fanned out next to my coffee mug. I remember reading parts of them, but not all of them. I trusted him. I signed. I shouldn't have signed. The Tuesday, everything began to unravel, started like every other Tuesday. I had a half day at the clinic, finished by noon. I stopped at the Tim Hortons near the lakeshore because I wanted a soup, and I didn't feel like cooking. I took a seat by the window. I was tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep, but the kind that had been building for months, a low-grade unease I couldn't name. There was a woman sitting 2 tables over. She was older than me, I guess early 70s, with white hair cut close to her head and reading glasses she kept taking on and off. She had a large tea and a folder of papers in front of her. I didn't pay much attention to her at first. Cliff texted me just as my soup arrived. He said he'd be dropping by the Lakeshore branch of our bank that afternoon to sort out some paperwork and asked if I could meet him there at 2. I said I could. I was almost finished eating when the woman spoke. "Excuse me," her voice was quiet but direct. "I'm sorry to bother you. Do you mind if I sit for just a moment?" I looked up. She was already standing beside my table holding her tea. Something in her expression made me say yes before I'd fully decided to. She sat down across from me and placed both hands flat on the table, like she was steadying herself. "I don't know how to say this without sounding like a stranger who's lost her mind," she said, "so I'm just going to say it. I was sitting close enough to hear your phone call. I wasn't trying to. But I heard the name of your bank branch, and I heard your husband's name." I set down my spoon. "My name is Rosemary," she said. "And 3 years ago my husband did something to me that I have spent every day since trying to recover from." When I heard those words, "sort out some paperwork" at the bank, I felt it in my stomach the same way I felt it that day. She slid a business card across the table. It had the name of a family law firm in Burlington on it, with a handwritten phone number on the back. "I'm not saying your situation is the same as mine," she said. "I don't know your life, but I am asking you, before you go to that bank this afternoon, please call that number. It's a paralegal I trust. Just ask her one question. Ask her whether you're permitted to request a full account activity report on any joint account before authorizing any changes." Then she stood up, picked up her tea, and walked back to her table. I sat there for a long moment. My soup had gone cold. Outside, someone was reversing a delivery van into the wrong spot and a cyclist was yelling at them. I thought about leaving. I thought about finishing my soup and driving to the bank and meeting Cliff. and signing whatever he needed signed and going home. I thought about how he would laugh if I told him a stranger at Tim Hortons had warned me about him. I could already hear the laugh. Instead, I picked up the business card and called the number on the back. The paralegal's name was Sandra, and she answered on the second ring. I explained the situation in about 90 seconds, feeling slightly ridiculous as I did it. She didn't make me feel ridiculous. She asked me 2 very specific questions, then told me 3 things I didn't know. First, in Ontario, a spouse can request a full disclosure of any joint account activity without the other spouse's consent. Second, if changes to joint property ownership or joint financial accounts were being processed, I had the right to receive independent legal advice before any documents became binding. Third, if I had signed documents in the past without reading them fully, which I admitted I had, there were circumstances under which those signatures could be challenged, depending on what exactly I had signed. Before you go to that bank, Sandra said, go home and look for any paperwork you still have from the property management business, anything your husband asked you to sign. Photograph everything. Don't take the originals. Just photograph them and send them to this email. She gave me the email address. I went home. I found the folder in Cliff's office, a room I rarely entered, which I now understand was by design. He kept things orderly, organized. Nothing looked alarming on the surface, but I photographed every document I could find, sent them to Sandra's email, then sat in the kitchen and waited. Cliff texted at 1:45. On my way to the bank, you coming? I texted back, running a few minutes late. Go ahead, I'll meet you there. He texted a thumbs up. Sandra called me back at 1:58. I need you to listen carefully, she said. Some of what you sent me is routine, but there are 2 documents in there that are not routine. One of them is a limited power of attorney for financial decisions related to the property company, which is normal. But the second one is broader than it should be. The language in it extends to personal financial accounts. That's not standard. That's not what you think you signed. My hands had gone cold. There's more, she said. I did a quick title search while we were talking. One of the properties listed in the company documents is a condo unit. The title on that unit was transferred 8 months ago. The property is now jointly held by your husband and a numbered company. I can't tell you from here who owns that numbered company, but it's worth finding out. I asked her what I should do. Don't go to that bank today, she said. Tell him whatever you need to tell him, and come to our office first thing tomorrow morning. I sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes after I hung up. I felt completely still, the way you feel when your body knows something before your mind has finished processing it. I texted Cliff and told him I wasn't feeling well, that I was going to skip the bank visit. He called immediately. He was warm, concerned, asked if I needed anything, said it was no problem, the paperwork could wait. He was so reasonable. He'd always been so reasonable. That night, I barely slept. I lay in the dark listening to him breathe and thought about 22 years of reasonable explanations. The next morning, I went to Sandra's office in Burlington while Cliff was at a breakfast meeting he'd mentioned the week before. Sandra had brought in a real estate lawyer, a colleague of hers. The 3 of us sat around a small table and went through everything. The power of attorney I had signed 3 years earlier, the one Cliff had described as just for the business, contained language that gave him authority to make changes to accounts I held jointly with him without my signature being present at the time of the transaction. It was legal technically, but I had not been given independent legal advice before signing it, which in Ontario creates grounds to challenge it. Sandra explained this carefully. She wasn't promising anything. She was giving me information and letting me decide what to do with it. The condo was the more serious issue. The title transfer had happened without my knowledge. Cliff was listed as sole owner of the unit in our joint investment account statements, but the actual title had moved to the numbered company 8 months ago without any notification to me. That was not legal. The numbered company, it turned out, was owned by Cliff and a woman named, and I am using her real name because it matters, Doreen. They had been in a relationship, Sandra explained gently, that appeared to predate the company's incorporation by at least 2 years. I don't know how to describe what I felt in that moment. It wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't the heartbreak of the affair that came later, quietly, in pieces. What I felt in that room was something sharper and stranger. I felt the specific humiliation of having been organized against, of having been managed, of understanding that what I'd thought was a marriage was, at least in part, a logistics problem he'd been solving. I didn't cry in that office. I asked what I needed to do next. We moved quickly after that. Sandra's colleague filed an injunction to freeze the joint accounts and flag any pending transactions on the condo title. I contacted my own bank independently and placed a hold on the GIC, my mother's money, requesting that any withdrawal require a secondary verification call to my cell phone. The bank compliance officer I spoke to was a woman who had clearly had this conversation before. She walked me through it without making me feel ashamed. Cliff came home that evening. He seemed entirely normal. He made pasta. He asked about my day. I told him I'd rested and felt better. He said good. We watched television. He fell asleep on the couch and I sat in the armchair across from him and thought, how long have you been doing this? 2 days later, he went to the bank branch to finalize whatever he planned. He was informed that a legal hold had been placed on the accounts and that no transactions could be processed pending a review. He called me from the parking lot. I let it go to voicemail. His voice on the voicemail was very calm. He said there had been some kind of administrative mix-up with the accounts and he'd sort it out. He said not to worry. I called Sandra. The following weeks were not easy. I won't pretend they were. There is nothing clean or simple about dismantling a life that has been shared, even a life that was being quietly stolen from you. I moved into my sister's spare room for 3 weeks while the legal process began. My sister, to her credit, did not say I told you so, even though she later admitted she had seen something in Cliff years ago that she'd never been able to name. The injunction held. The condo title transfer was successfully challenged. Cliff retained a lawyer and attempted to argue that the power of attorney had been a mutual arrangement I'd been fully informed of. He was not successful in making that argument. Doreen, for her part, was largely a side chapter in the legal proceedings. Present, but not central. She and Cliff had apparently planned to use the condo as a rental property under the numbered company, generating income that would exist entirely outside our marital assets. A tidy solution, if you're the kind of person who thinks of your spouse as a problem to be solved. The numbered company was dissolved. The condo was returned to joint matrimonial asset status and included in the separation proceedings. My GIC was never touched. My mother's money sat safe in that account the whole time, exactly where she'd put it. The divorce took 14 months. I won't go into all of it. What I will say is that the outcome was fair. Not perfect. It never is. But fair. I received a settlement that reflected 22 years of contribution to a shared life. My name came off the power of attorney. The property company was wound down. I went back to the Tim Hortons on Lakeshore about 6 months after everything was finalized. I don't know why exactly. Habit maybe. Or something closer to gratitude that needed a physical location. Rosemary wasn't there. I asked one of the staff, described her older woman, white hair, reading glasses, always had a folder with her. The young man behind the counter thought for a moment and said, "Oh, the lady who used to come in on Tuesdays. Yeah, she moved away, I think. Somewhere out west. Her daughter lives in Victoria." I sat by the window with my soup. I thought about a woman I'd spoken to for less than 3 minutes who had, in those 3 minutes, handed me the thread I needed to pull. I thought about what she'd said. I felt it in my stomach the same way I felt it that day, and I understood that she hadn't saved me out of some abstract kindness. She had saved me because someone had failed to save her, and she had decided that mattered. I still have her business card. It's in the small dish on my kitchen windowsill, where I keep things that mean something. The ink on the handwritten number on the back has faded a little. I'm 65 now. I live in a small condo in Burlington, which I bought in my name, with my signature. After reading every single word of every single document, I have a good lawyer I trust and a paralegal I keep on speed dial, and a GIC that is quietly growing, the way my mother always intended. My sister calls me every Sunday. She still doesn't like anyone, but she likes calling me. And every Tuesday, when I stop for soup, I sit near the window, just in case. I've thought a lot about why Rosemary did what she did. She didn't know me. She had no reason to get involved. She could have finished her tea, gathered her folder, and walked out of that Tim Hortons without saying a single word, and her life would have continued exactly the same. But she didn't. And I've come to believe that the choice she made in that moment cost her something. It takes a certain kind of courage to approach a stranger and say, "I think something is being done to you," because you risk being wrong. You risk being dismissed. You risk a cold stare and an uncomfortable silence. She took that risk anyway. What Clifford did had a logic to it. That's the part that took me longest to come to terms with, not the betrayal itself, but the patience of it. The documents signed at a kitchen counter. The power of attorney described as routine. The years of being managed so smoothly, I never felt the hand guiding me. He didn't act impulsively, he planned. And what I've learned, sitting with that, is that people who deceive the people closest to them rarely do it in one dramatic moment. They do it in small, reasonable-sounding steps, each one easy to explain away. The consequence of that kind of behavior isn't always immediate. But it does arrive. The injunction arrived. The title search arrived. The truth arrived. Quietly, through a paralegal's phone call in my own kitchen. I don't think of what happened to me as a story about a bad marriage exactly. I think of it as a story about what happens when you stop reading the fine print, not just on documents but in your own life. I had trusted without verifying. I had signed without reading. I had confused the lengths of a relationship with the depth of it. Those aren't moral failures, they're human ones. But they have consequences, and I lived those consequences for 14 months of legal proceedings and a lot of sleepless nights in my sister's spare room. What I came out with on the other side was something I hadn't expected, a much clearer sense of what I actually know how to do. I had spent 31 years as a dental hygienist. I had raised 2 children largely on my own initiative while working full-time. I had managed my own mother's estate after she passed, handled her accounts, dealt with the paperwork, made the decisions. I was not helpless. I had simply been persuaded over years to act as though I were. Getting out of that persuasion required intelligence more than anything else. The intelligence to ask the right question to the right person at the right moment, which is what Sandra gave me when she answered that call on the second ring. Rosemary had been through something that broke a part of her she never fully described to me, but instead of letting that breakage become bitterness, she turned it into attention. She sat in the Tim Hortons on Tuesday afternoons and she paid attention to the people around her. That is its own kind of wisdom, the kind you can't learn from a book, only from having survived something. I think about the woman I was before that Tuesday. She wasn't naive, exactly. She was just tired. And tired people stop noticing. The version of me sitting in that kitchen chair, photographing documents with shaking hands. She was frightened, yes, but she was also paying attention again. And paying attention, I've come to believe, is the beginning of everything.